Good evening. My name is Tim Neff, and I'm a Director of Museum and Education and a Vice President at Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall and Museum, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I want to welcome you all to our Spotlight On program, which takes place the second Thursday of each month at 7 p.m. And I want to thank you all for joining us on this beautiful evening here in Pittsburgh or wherever you are. And joining me tonight, as usual, is our Curator of Collections, Michael Kraus. Mike has been working at Soldiers and Sailors for many, many years, just like myself, and we're very happy to be bringing you these programs on a monthly basis. Michael, you want to say hi and unmute yourself there?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Tim and I really enjoy bringing you these Spotlight On, and tonight we have a really special one.
Yeah, tonight we will be looking at historic flags from our collection. And there is a reason we chose that topic, which we'll get into a little bit later on. But before we do, let me just tell you a little bit about Soldiers and Sailors in case you're new to us here, and this might be one of the first videos you're watching. This is also a good time to point out that you can watch us live on Facebook, on YouTube each month, or you can just watch archive programs. All the Spotlight Ons that we have provided are available on both our Facebook and YouTube pages, so we encourage you to go back and look at some of the archives. We've done a lot of very interesting programs through the years, and they're all available for you to view. But like I said, if you're new to us here, just a quick note about Soldiers and Sailors. We are located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You see our beautiful building there on the left, and it was built back in 1910 as a Civil War memorial. About 25,000 men from Allegheny County served in the Civil War, and this building was built to honor their service to the Union Army. Now, that being said, through the years, of course, other wars have occurred, and today Soldiers and Sailors stands as a memorial and a museum that honors veterans from all wars, Civil War through present day. And our exhibits, which you can see there on the right, are filled with artifacts that have been donated to us through the years by veterans and their families, and we use these objects that tell their stories and honor their service to our country. So we have a lot of great stories. That's really what I think we've kind of come around to, Mike, is we're a museum of stuff, but more importantly, a museum of stories behind the stuff. And this is one of the ways that we like to bring those stories alive is with this Spotlight On program. As usual, if you have any questions or answers, if you're watching on Facebook, it's real easy. All you have to do is submit a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, you can email us at soldiersandsailorspittsburgh@gmail.com. If we don't get to that one during the program, we will certainly get you an answer as soon as we can after the program. So please, anytime you can type your question in there, and we'll take time to either answer it as it's being asked, or maybe we'll hold it off to the end, depending on where we are in our stream of conscience, if you will, as we try to keep things moving here. Here we are, Michael Kraus, Curator of Collections, and myself. And without further ado, we're going to jump into the program here and talk today about the United States flag. And when we were thinking of a topic to come up with here, I think it was Michael who really hit on the idea that coming up here on June 14th is Flag Day. And we have a huge collection of flags at the museum. We actually have a room, which we call Rally Around the Flag, or just our flag room for short, that is filled with some great flags through the years from our collection. But today we're really focusing on the United States flag and different variations that we have. Now, to be honest, this first flag we're looking at is the only flag you're going to see today that we do not is not in our collection. And this one we wanted to start with because this is a very familiar flag to many people. It is really known today almost as a nickname. It's known as the Betsy Ross flag, with the circle of 13 stars, obviously representing the 13 original colonies and the 13 stripes. However, we are here today, unfortunately, to kind of debunk that myth of Betsy Ross creating and sewing the first flag. I think most historians agree that there is not much proof, and really, let's be honest, any proof that is actually how the flag originated. So there's actually a lot of questions about how it actually originated. But this version here is very popularly known, very popular to see, and it is known as the Betsy Ross flag. But most historians agree that there's a gentleman, a congressman at the time. He was a continental congressman at the time. His name was Francis Hopkinson from New Jersey. He was also the Continental Navy Board chairperson or chairman. And he is credited really with coming up with some of the basic elements of our flag today. The stripes, the stars, the blue field, these things really started to come together when he was just trying to come up with not only a flag for the United States, but also a flag for the United States Navy. And you can see some of these early variations that kind of you can meld them together to come to be known as the flag that we know today. But it really wasn't until June 14th, 1777, that we had our first flag resolution. And that officially reads, let me get my official paper here, resolved that the flag of the United States be made of 13 stripes, alternating red and white, that the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field, representing a new constellation. And that was on June 14th, 1777. And as a result of that, every year on June 14th, it's become known as Flag Day. And we're saying all this, and I'm kind of leading with just this little introduction to kind of arrive at why we are doing the program today. When I go to the next slide here, this is actually a 13-star flag that we have in our collection. And this is a little bit of a different star pattern, which was common. That circular pattern is what is known as the Betsy Ross kind of pattern or flag. But if you really look into it, there's all kinds of different ways that the stars were aligned throughout the years in the early years of our country here. And Michael, can you just tell us real quickly about this flag? I believe this was presented to an American Legion. Am I correct there?
Yeah, it came from an American Legion post. I imagine it was a centerpiece in their either meeting hall or their rec room. It's old. We wish it was from the 18th century because it'd be a very valuable flag. But it most likely comes from the 150th anniversary of the United States back in 1936, of the 1776, the Declaration of Independence, because there was a huge patriotic swell of history, and these 13-star flags were made and represented and shown in lots of places. So just by the construction of it, looking at it and its size, I would imagine it's from the 1930s.
Okay.
I might say, is this a good time to talk about some nomenclature about flags?
Sure.
Okay. Before we look at some of the flags, when you look at a flag, the part that Tim referred to as the Betsy Ross pattern, the blue field with the white stars, that's called the canton. I don't know where the name comes from, but it's not only in U.S. flags, but it's in flags. Any flag that has a square or piece up on the left-hand side. Now, where it's attached to the pole, that length is called the fly, that's where it's called the hoist, because that's where the flag is actually hoisted up on a pole. And as you extend out from the pole, that's called the fly. So we have all these different names, and it's going to come into play a little. I'm going to give you some dimensions on a few flags later, but just remember that the hoist comes on the pole, the fly is the extending part, and you would have other pieces, like on the pole, you have a finial. That's the cap piece on top of a pole. I mean, we often see a round ball, an eagle, and on a lot of military flags, it's a spearhead. So let's walk into our discussion, just kind of knowing some of the terms we might use tonight.
Yeah, and also before we get started, I just also want to point out, the flag was established in 1777 on June 14th, as we said. But I think two other important dates to note are April 4th, 1818, which this was when it was officially said that stars would represent states. So instead of just staying with that traditional number of 13 stars, every time a new state was added, the following 4th of July, a new star would be added. So in 1818, we went up to 20 stars, right? How many states we had, and we would already be up in Illinois. So that's really where that's representation of stars and states comes into play. We also have in 1912, by executive order of President Taft, the idea of the established proportions of the flag. And that's really going to provide for an exact arrangement of the stars, how which way the points are pointed, really starts to bring some unification and, some uniformity, I should say, to our flag. So, it has gone through these subtle changes through the years. And I also think it's kind of interesting, as I was looking this up, and it should point out, being who we are, June 14th is also recognized as the birthday of the United States Army. So it's kind of got two things going for it on June 14th. But Flag Day was officially established through a proclamation of Woodrow Wilson in 1916 and an act of Congress in 1949. So although not a federal holiday, it is a day that, should take a moment to reflect upon the flag. And if you're a person that flies the flag, you should fly it on Flag Day. And all brings us to where we are today for our program. And we're going to dive into some of these flags from our collection. We are going to go basically in chronological order. So we're going to start with the Civil War. And I think our first flag here is a pretty interesting story behind it. And that is the flag of Arthur Sherman from the 13th Regiment of the New York National Guard. What can you tell us about this one, Michael?
Well, I wish I could tell you a lot about Arthur Sherman, but he's pretty elusive. He doesn't show up in any record that I've been able to search. And that comes from the fact that of his unit affiliation, the New York National Guard. New York had several different components to their military: the National Guard, the volunteers, and the state militia. So these are different entities that feed into the. Many of them will feed into the federal army in the Civil War. But if you notice on the right, there's a note in our old collection. When I say old collection, dating back to when Soldiers and Sailors first opened, there are notes, provenance notes, that were sometimes written and accompanied a piece when it was put on display in one of the 4 showcases in the early days of Soldiers and Sailors. In this one, we have a number of notes made by this same gentleman. His name was Frazier, last name, first name unknown. And the notes we have that are written by him are all in this really nice handwriting, kind of stylized with the border and dates and everything. And they were done around 1923. So we know that this goes back pretty far. But here's the thing about this flag. It's a pretty plain flag. It's a printed flag. You'll have flags that are sewn, where the stars are actually, each one is individually sewn to the blue field, and the stripes are individually sewn. But this one's printed, so it was a less expensive flag. But the note, the whole history of it is in this note, where he says that Sherman was in the 13th Regiment, the New York National Guard, and this flag was raised. This flag was raised over his tent. I know. There we go. This flag was raised over his tent in Baltimore just after passing through and being fired upon by the 6th Mass Regiment, April 1861. So what does that refer to? It's a little foggy. The first troops that came to answer the Lincoln's call to Washington had to come, because of the way the railroads were available, had to come into Baltimore and change trains. There were 2 different stations. One was the Camden Street station, which that ought to ring a bell to you, Tim. It's the Camden Yards is where the baseball stadium is. So the troops had to change trains, and coming through Baltimore in April of 1861, Maryland did not secede, but it had a lot of loyalties on both sides. And there were, let's say, crowds of people, thousands of people taunting the Union soldiers who came through, and especially the 6th Massachusetts. Stones were thrown at him, bricks were thrown at him. One soldier was killed by a brick, and the 6th Massachusetts opened fire on the crowd to protect themselves. And I think this flag may have been in Baltimore at the time, or due to that incident, Private Sherman hung it on his tent to show his patriotism. So the note goes on to say it was given to Mrs. Hyde by Mr. Sherman and presented by her grandson, M.H. Buffington. So we have this whole lineage of the flag, but we can pretty much be sure that it was in Baltimore in April 1861, and has some tie to the riot there as the Union troops were passing by. Pretty historic flag.
Yeah, definitely shows its age there, but that's part of its character, and it's beautifully displayed at our museum here. Now, the next one we have here, we're going to dive into the 102nd Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment, and this is a close-up look of the canton, as Mike explained earlier, which is that top corner or that patch at the top corner of a flag. And this one is, of course, coming from the seal of Pennsylvania, and this is what it should look like, right, Mike? This is kind of a close-up on a good version of the canton.
Right, Pennsylvania troops, each regiment was issued a state color, as they were called. And it pretty much looked like a U.S. flag, except the canton had this crest of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in it with 34 stars surrounding. We're not seeing the stars. But then it had red and white stripes, and it had the number of each regiment painted on it, like the 102nd Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry would be painted on one of the stripes. So these were, each one, like I said, were presented by the state to the regiments in a ceremony. It was a pretty grand thing, and these were battle flags. There were silk, and you imagine this hand painted insignia on it. That was pretty fragile. The silk was fragile, and they became severely damaged, not just by the weather, but by battle, bullet holes and such. And because they were property of the state, each regiment had to, if the flag was so bad and so falling apart, they had to turn in the remnants of what they had, and they would be issued a new flag. And then this is where we're going to get the next part of our story. So if you look on the left, this is what remains of the 102nd Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment's battle flag. That flag is in Harrisburg. It was turned in 1865. But you notice the big square that's missing in the center? Well, that part we have, and it's on the right-hand side, the painted crest of the state of Pennsylvania. And that was given to us by the last colonel of the regiment, Colonel Patchell. And it wasn't uncommon for flags to be, I call it souvenired, where little pieces were snipped off and given to men. You frequently see them in some museum displays. This is a pretty big piece of a flag, and it's very fragile. We don't display it. It's put away. We need to raise some money to have it restored properly. But it is interesting that Patchell, was the one who souvenired this great big chunk out of the flag of the regiment he commanded.
All right, and our next flag here is from the 103rd Pennsylvania Regiment, Infantry Regiment. And this is another one that obviously shows its age and is not on display and is being preserved. Although we have shown this before, right, Michael? We've had this out for special occasions and special exhibits through the years. But really the story behind this is its connection to the Andersonville prison of the Civil War. So I'll let Michael take it away here and tell us a little bit about this story here of the flag of the 103rd.
Yeah, I'm just grabbing a note here. This flag has a tie to the 103rd Pennsylvania, and in Armstrong County, there was a school called the Blaney School of Sugar Creek Township, and a number of the boys from that school enlisted to go into a Pennsylvania regiment, the 103rd, and with their teacher. And in the couple days before they left, the girls of the school sat together and made this flag for Company B. So it's a non-regulation flag. It's not the state colors that the regiment carries, but it's a local presentation, what we historians refer to as a local presentation. The flag was probably used as a camp flag. It wouldn't have been flown in the front of the regiment because it belonged to one regiment and one company, and they would have had the proper state colors at the head of the regiment. But at Plymouth, North Carolina, I think it's North Carolina, in 1864, the regiment was surrounded and captured. Most men were captured. The 101st and the 103rd Pennsylvania had the dubious distinction of being captured in mass. They were sent to Andersonville prison. Well, this Pettinger, who is pictured on the right, he would not permit that that flag to be taken. So he wrapped it around his body and hid it from the captors. And he subsequently, Petzinger is his name, he consequently hid it in his tent, or what kind of tentage he may have had at Andersonville, being very careful to guard it. He would bury it so that the guards wouldn't find it. And when he was paroled in December of 1864, he brought the flag back home with him and kept it the rest of his life. When he died, it was presented to soldiers and sailors. So if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, that's picture appears in the regimental history of the 103rd, and that is the Blaney School flag. And what remains of it, you have to remember, this is a very fragile flag, not only because of what happened to it during the war, but the dyes are acidic, and you can see the red stripes have pretty much given way due to the acid in them. The white stripes are pretty intact. The blue is remarkably intact. And this is what exists of it today. We have, again, this is not on display. It's far too fragile. We have it put away. It can be viewed if somebody would want to make an appointment. We have pulled it out occasionally. But I want to call to your attention, too, the star pattern. And Tim talked a little bit about that, 1912 being standardized. Before that, star patterns could be anything, and they were actually quite artistic. There are many different variations, and this one is particularly interesting. The stars are painted. The girls didn't have enough time to stitch every star to it, and it's made out of cotton and muslin rather than a wool bunting, which is pretty typical, or silk. So this is a very historic flag that we have in our collection, and it's been with us a long, long time.
Yeah, I think anybody who knows about the Civil War and has heard about Andersonville knows about the terrible conditions there, and just to survive that experience is, something that not many people got to talk about and got to survive from. And the fact that, not only did he survive, but he carried this flag and protected this flag throughout that time is, adds so much intrigue to it. It's also interesting, I think, Michael, we were talking earlier about the Betsy Ross Smith and, kind of how does that come about? And, you had mentioned how women presenting flags to soldiers that were going off to war, or just, in different ways, it was very common at the time. And I think this is a story that is along those lines of these women presenting this flag to a group of soldiers going off to the war.
Yeah, it was so common that it was a problem because all these different companies, there are 10 companies in a regiment, many companies would come with their own flags, and it got to be confusing. So there were general orders put out by the Army telling these regiments to send all those flags home. And apparently this one wasn't. It was, with Company B when they were captured at Plymouth.
Now, the next one, we're going to move into the Spanish-American War, and what we have here is a ensign flag, number 4, and this is from the Cavite Naval Yard in the Philippines, and this one is on display. As we go along here, you've seen some more of these are on display, some are not, but this is on display in our Spanish-American War display case. And Michael, what can you tell us about this one here? This is this ensign flag.
Yeah, here's a new term. Well, first of all, we're talking about naval flags, and an ensign in Navy terms is a particular size flag flown on board a craft. So when it says, and you can see the hand lettering on the hoist, we're going to use our terms that we learned, USE ensign number 10, United States Navy Yard, Cavite, Philippine Islands, December 15, 1902. So Cavite was the Battle of Manila in May of 1898, where Admiral Dewey successfully defeated the Spanish fleet. And as a consequence of that, a U.S. naval yard was installed at Cavite, which is still a naval yard, although it's changed names. And I forgive me if I don't pronounce this right, but it's the United States Naval Station Sangley Point, but it was transferred back to the Philippines. It's now known as Naval Station Pascual Ledesma. But the inscription tells us that this flag was issued out of the Navy quartermaster stores in the Philippines. Now, we talked a little bit about the number 10. So number 10 refers to a specific size, and that would be 2 foot 9/10 on the hoist and 5 feet 5.5 inches on the fly. So this is a specific size that it's mentioning.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about how this, illustrates a time of United States expansion, of course, through the Spanish-American War, and having a presence all the way over in the Philippines with this naval base. And we're not sure though how this ended up back here in Pittsburgh, right, Mike? We don't know how we ended up with this one in our collection.
It came in a donation of families' pieces. It doesn't seem like it was flown on any craft. It doesn't show any wear. It may have just been a soldier who served in the Philippines somehow. I kind of remember the story. It was found in a drawer somewhere, and unknown how it got there, but it was saved by a family who eventually, several generations down the line, brought it to us.
Okay. Our next flag is a very interesting flag with an interesting story. It's we're calling it the 34 to 34 star transition flag, and I think we'll know why that is. You see there an old newspaper clipping there with the flag, and we'll see the flag here in a moment. But what are we looking at here before we take a look at the flag? What are we seeing here, Michael?
Again, we're seeing a flag that was in a family for a very long time. We just acquired this about a year ago, and the family thought, based on some information, that this flag flew with Commodore Perry's fleet in Japan. And that's kind of the note that you see sort of indicates something along those terms. It says, made by Mr. Whitford when signal quartermaster on the Susquehanna. The Susquehanna was Perry's flagship with Commodore Perry in Japan, made from pieces of the first flag raised in Japan. So we've kind of melted it down. We know where the first flag, we know where Perry's flag is. In fact, it was on the ship that received the surrender in World War II. It was specially brought out and framed and hung in the background with MacArthur and the Japanese representatives. It was on the ship. So this was made from pieces from one of those flags. And we call it a transition flag because if you look at the picture on the right, the flag originally had 32 stars. And in the very top right side, 2 stars were added. So we can maybe look at the other flag now.
See it all flowing out here at Soldiers and Sailors.
Yeah, this is here. This is now. That was then. So if it was a 32-star flag, that would date between 1858 and 59. Very short life relevance for a 32-star flag. So the 33rd star is for Oregon, which came in February 1859. And the 34th came in as Kansas in January of 1861. So rather than make a new flag, these two stars were just kind of haphazardly added in between the rows of the other stars. The flag's made out of wool bunting. The stars are individually sewn on. The stripe, every piece of this flag is hand sewn. There's not a stitch that was made by a machine. And, for us, it represents this period right before the Civil War, between 1858 and 1861, where a couple states are being added, and the Union Army is going to go into the war with a 34-star flag, which would have made this one appropriate if it was used during that time.
Okay, and then our next one, this one that we're looking at here is a 45-star flag. And this is actually the backdrop to our flag display room. If you see our flag, you can see kind of some of the other flags just off in the corners here. But this is a 45-star flag, and this is dating it back to just about the time that Soldiers and Sailors opened in 1910. And on the left there, you see a photograph of Soldiers and Sailors in its very infancy, with Civil War veterans lined up in front, and the flagpole there flying a flag. Now, we can't say for sure it's this flag, but a flag that would have been very similar to this. Even the size seems to kind of match up a little bit. So even though this one might not have been, we think there's a chance this one could have flown at one time around that same time frame in the early days of the building. And Mike and you and I were talking. It's interesting to note, if you've been to Soldiers and Sailors more recently, of course, you might think of our flagpole down at Fifth Avenue. And that is all the way down at the end of our walkway, basically up against the sidewalk on Fifth Avenue. Well, in the early days of the building, the flags were up closer to the front of the entrance, up on what we call our patio today, or the main entranceway there. Actually, really what we're looking at here is where that U.S. flag is exactly where the soldier statue is, going into Soldiers and Sailors. And then just on the right, it's not, unfortunately, kind of able to see it blowing in the wind, but you can see the pole. That one would have been where the sailor statue is today. So am I correct to say that the pedestals that were used for these flags ended up being used for the statues? Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, exactly. Those pedestals were once flagpole pedestals, and now they're a pedestal for the large soldier and sailor that's in front of our building.
And when were they installed? They were installed in the
1923.
23.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but in the early days, that's where the flag, and we think the other flag, it could have been a county flag. It could have been a state flag. We don't know exactly what it was. But we found this really neat little image here of, the early days of the building. And we have this flag that dates to that same time period that has been in our collection since we've both been here, and is on display now at the museum. And they also kind of related to the origins of the building here was a time capsule box that was placed in our cornerstone. And this would have been placed in 1908 as the cornerstone was laid. We knew it was there. It's well documented. It was even well documented what was inside of it. But, curious minds have to know, as a part of our 100th anniversary, we actually had the cornerstone pulled out and retrieved this time capsule out of the cornerstone itself. And we had some press there that day, and we were going to have a big reveal. And Michael, I know you were the one that actually opened it up, and you can take it from there with how it all unfolded.
Yeah, there are moments that are pregnant with anticipation, and that was one of them. Like you said, Tim, we knew what was in there. We had a list of the things that were in there, but we imagined maybe they threw a Civil War pistol in, or somebody made a late edition that wasn't there. And we were just excited to open it. What happened was the box is made out of copper, with a copper lid fitted on. And remember, this is 1908. So these are the materials that are available. In fact, it was probably made from surplus copper used in the roofing or in the flashing of the building. When I opened it, it was, first of all, I saw on top the remnants of a flag, and that's what you see on the right. Very a little bit of the pole. It's like a little stick flag that one would carry at a parade or a 4th of July flag. It was laying on top, carefully placed on top, but what it was on top of was not what we expected. In fact, the copper box, even though it was dry, it was not outside, it wasn't in the elements. The fact that it was copper and it was near the outside with the heat and cold and the stone produced over time a lot of condensation. And the top of the lid was kind of dimpled down, and that condensation just had its way with the contents. And it turned it into a pile of unretrievable muck, we called it. It was not pretty when we opened it, and there was press there, and there was, we were all waiting to see what it was, but it became its own story, and we were able to we were able to take the mass to the county coroner and have it x-rayed, where we found the location of several medals and coins that were placed in it. But the flag was not described. It was just carefully laid and lovingly laid on top. And it did make the 100-year journey. So it's been with us 100 years, and it's still with us now, 112.
Yeah, and what we're looking at there is a muck, as you say, of newspaper and documents and things that, as that moisture took hold, just turned it into this almost like a layered cake. But within there, as Michael said, we did find several medals that can be identified that we also knew were in there. But it was a surprise. The flag was not listed. That was something we did not expect. And am I correct that some of that flag make it into the next time capsule?
No, I don't think we put in.
No,
we put some of the mass. We cut a piece off and put it in. We did make a new time capsule, like you're talking about.
Yeah, we had a new one placed in that hopefully will be opened years later and to better results than this one here. So our next one's going to bring us to World War II. And if you've watched some of our programs, we've highlighted this flag before, and to be honest, we're going to keep highlighting it whenever we can, because it's certainly one of the more prized possessions in our collection. This is a flag from the LCI 540, one of the landing craft infantry at D-Day. It's a beautiful piece. It hangs in our D-Day exhibit and has a really great lineage and story behind it on how, really can track it to, how we can accurately identify it as exactly what we're saying here. Right, Michael? I mean, it is kind of got a pristine provenance behind it.
Yeah, it was given to the boat captain by the men, and then subsequently given to a survivor or two after that. The captain passed away later, but we have the note talking about it being a D-Day flag, and it's just shredded on the fly end. You can imagine the whipping, when you look at it, the whipping of the wind, and there's diesel smoke staining the stars and the stripes, and it's really one of those things that talks about being there. Now, LCI 540 landed on the red sector at Omaha Beach, and after dropping off troops, it would pick up wounded. And it would go back to England and pick up more troops and keep coming. It made 33 trips from Weymouth to Normandy, and this flag was part of that history. So it's a very historic flag. We can pin it to a day and a time, and it shows the evidence of flying on that craft.
Yeah, and it's certainly something that I know when I'm giving a tour, especially to young people, I really try to get them to understand what they're seeing here, this moment in time, this piece of history from this monumental event in American history. We have flags from the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, they're not United States flags. That's why we're not highlighting them in this program. But I do the same thing with that, and really try to get them to just take pride in the fact that here we are in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and in this museum that has just these little pieces that take you to an exact moment of history, and just happen to be some of the most famous moments in American history in Gettysburg, and of course in this case D-Day. We also have this one here from another landing craft, which, I think it's important to maybe just quickly note here, Michael, that landing craft have a close tie to Pittsburgh because many were made here in Pittsburgh. We had them made at the Ambridge Bridge Company, and the Draveau Works were also responsible for making many of these landing craft of all different variations, everything from infantry to LSTs, things in that, and they make their way down the Mississippi and go out and be shipped off to war. But this one is specific to the Coast Guard, and this is LST 793. So what are we looking at here, Michael, with this one?
It was a LST, landing ship tank. So this is a larger craft than we looked at the landing craft infantry. These were, and like you say, they were built in Ambridge. It wasn't the only place. 2 companies in Ambridge produced them. There were other places where they were made, but certainly the Ambridge locations were pretty prolific in what they put out. And the Coast Guard had this one. Then either the Navy or the Coast Guard would crew the craft. We know that it was in the Pacific Theater. It was delivered late in 1944. This is the flag that flew on it. It is an ensign number 4, which means it is 4.82 inches on the hoist, or feet, 4.82 feet on the hoist, and 6.77 feet on the fly. So it's a pretty good big flag. We also, if we look on the right-hand side, there's the bell from LST 793. And the little strip that you see is the commissioning pennant, which is also a flag. It's a tiny strip that was ceremoniously used when the ship was commissioned. So that goes along with the flag that we display in our Coast Guard display.
And I think we have a photo here of the LST in action here. You can see the tank unloading through the front doors there on the right. And so you can
there's
see
the
that
launch on the left in Ambridge.
Right, the launch. Yeah, and that's
it's sliding down the ramps.
Right,
and then,
right.
And it gives you an idea how big they are if you look on the right. The big doors are open, and tanks are coming out of there.
Yeah,
lots of tanks.
I don't know. Do you
tanks,
know
Jeeps, trucks.
how many tanks they could fit on there?
I don't know that. It's quite a few.
Yeah, I mean, but once again, giving you an idea of the size when you're talking about many tanks lined up on here waiting to be unloaded at a landing. And our next one here is also on display in our flag room, and this is another handmade flag presented by a woman in Belgium to the liberating troops, the United States liberators that were coming through. And this has just a kind of a very handmade look to it. I mean, when you look at it, it looks very crudely made, but that's part of its charm and part of its story, right, Mike?
Yeah. The woman who you see pictured in the middle, her name was Adele Oosterwijk, and she is from Manderfield, Belgium. And anticipating that they would be liberated by the American Army, she made this flag in October of 1944. I think they were liberated in December, but she made it out of scraps of fabric. So she carefully cut each one of the little stars and tacked them on. This wasn't a flag that flew very, very long, but it greeted American soldiers, and she was very proud of it. You can see her. It's not the greatest picture we have of her, but she is with the flag in that photograph. And on the left, just kind of shows you how appreciative the Belgians were after being liberated by the Americans. They were just mobbing the Americans and watching them come in. And I can picture that flag hanging out of Adele's window as the jeeps and tanks rolled in.
Right, and then I think we have one more here, and this was a little bit more modern. We've been looking at a lot of older flags, but this is a of this century here, and this is what they call a blood chit from Operation Iraqi Freedom. And this is, of course, you can see the flag. The reason we're using this artifact, you can see the flag at the top of this piece of silk, right? Is this made of silk?
Yeah, silk, because it could get wet and wouldn't be destroyed. Yeah, so silk is a good material.
Yeah, and this would have been carried by a pilot, or really, would it be almost any soldier, I guess, that had a potential to be captured or find themselves in a behind enemy line situation on their own.
Yeah, I believe you're right there. I mean, in the Second World War, we think of them in the Air Corps in the China-Burma-India theater. They were sewn on the pilot's jacket. But I think, the tradition was kind of picked up when we went into Iraq, and a lot of soldiers carried them. And they have, these different, this plea to say that they're an American and they won't harm you. And, if they're captured or behind enemy lines, please give them water and take care of them. And it's in several different languages. So hopefully those languages would be able to be understood by anybody who picked up and I can't think of an instance where it ever was needed, but they were in theater.
Yeah, you can see there that Arabic and Persian, Farsi, and Kurdish and Turkish, and it's like Michael said, just asking to please help and provide food and shelter and clothing and safe passage. It's just a kind of representative of what a soldier could be up against in a situation, and just to have that many different languages within one region would be so difficult. I don't care how much you worked on learning different languages, nobody could be able to speak all of these, and this was a solution to that issue. So that's going to bring us to the end here. So I don't know if we have any questions, but I don't see any at this time. But please feel free, questions or comments. We would welcome those at this time. While we're waiting, if we can get anything, I will just do our quick pitch for upcoming things here. When you want to learn more about Soldiers and Sailors, you always can visit soldiersandsailorshall.org to learn about how to visit the museum, learn about upcoming events. I always want to mention our next Tabletop Gamers will be next Saturday, June 17th. We'll be playing tabletop games related to D-Day. So we saw that flag there earlier on, and we'll be playing some games related to D-Day that day, some miniature games. I know there's going to be a huge setup of miniatures recreating the Battle of D-Day. So anybody who's interested in tabletop gaming, please, go to our website, learn more about our Tabletop Gamers Club. We meet once a month playing all different kinds of games, and it's a great experience. So that'll be next Saturday, June 17th. As usual, you can always make an appointment for a guided tour of the museum. All you have to do is call ahead or email me to take care of that. That can be done through the website. And I do always, encourage you to check the website before you visit, because there are days that sometimes we have to close for private events and things. So if you're planning on coming down, the source of all your information is soldiersandsailorshall.org to find out, what's going on and how to take care of scheduling a tour, visiting the museum. And coming up next month, we have our spotlight on will be about a book called A Civil War Husband. This was written by Cindy Kreitzer, and this is about her great-great-grandfather, Thomas Nelson. She discovered some of his letters in the family and transcribed them and turned it into a little book. He served with the 100th and Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment. And we're just really grateful because she's going to join us as a special guest, but we're going to combine that with some things that we have from the 100th PA. And I know, Michael, this is a passion of yours and a specific regiment you're interested in. And not to spoil anything, but we have some pretty cool stuff that represents that regiment during the war. So I don't see any comments coming up or questions. So with that, Michael, I want to say thank you to you for all the great information as always. I want to say thank you to all of our audience out there. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you tune in next month for our next program. And with that, I'm going to sign us off and say goodbye, and thank you all for joining us this evening.